So the theme of absorbing modernity for this Biennale is a very interesting one, looking back to the 100 years that are past us. I like the idea of absorption of modernity, since it makes you clear that when modernity came into effect in history, it came as a shock, basically, for most countries. It was this sudden feeling, we have to be modern, and we have to modernize our world. And this modernization came rather brutally for most cultures. And I think still until today, we chew on this kind of big bite that we were given to eat. Right? So it's like the snake that swallowed an animal that was slightly too big. And I think it took about 100 years to digest this really big piece of information and of transformation of our societies. And there's an interesting inversion happening. You could say that modernity forced itself upon an existing, grown cultural context that had developed over thousands of years. And within 100 years only, it sometimes actually completely changed and transformed that grown context. And now it's probably the time to sort of absorb modernity in the sense that we allow it to become a context itself, as opposed to simply being the disruption of our existing contexts. Right? And that's an interesting moment, because you could say modernism was this kind of sort of wrongdoer, this kind of criminal that was aggressive in its action, and one could be counter-aggressive, like some part of post-modernity was, by claiming we have to undo modernity, and by reinstalling and restoring the historical context. But that's obviously just a revenge tactics. It's much smarter, historically speaking, to say, okay, now we have to lend modernism the kind of empathy that it didn't have for history, so that it can become history itself. I think that's why this exhibition has something of it has something of an amnesty. There's this saying of amnesty for the devil. That's, I think, the moment that we're in. We're trying to give amnesty for this kind of shocking, kind of historical speed-up transformation, to now usher in an age where all the meaningful inventions of modernity can bear their fruits in a way that they may not have been able to do so in this very accelerated period that lies behind us. So this is probably a historical moment.
Okay, I think when you visit the different pavilions, you can see that there are basically two strategies in how to deal with the topic. And I think in the years before, the strategy was more the one that you go with one object or this kind of very strong one-liner idea for a pavilion, because people said, well, you don't have time to visit all of it, and it has to be, the idea has to be made clear in 10 seconds, and people don't spend more than 5 minutes in a pavilion. So, but I think this year there is the second strategy becoming stronger, where you really show a lot, where it's more like archival or museum-like, where you really have to spend a lot of time in the pavilion. The Korean pavilion is an example for that, as opposed to the German one, which is next to the Korean pavilion. And you really have to spend time, read a lot, and get a lot of information. I think it's interesting, and probably that's because of the topic that you have to cover these 100 years. So I think that's why many pavilions really go and make this more historical exhibition instead of what's new, because a lot of time it was only to show, well, that is our newest, hottest architecture stuff. So it's interesting.
For us, obviously, it's interesting to see the Korean pavilion because we're from Germany, a country that used to be divided. And we actually grew up in the two different parts. Ilka is from West Germany, I am from East Germany. And we now live actually in a house that stands on the former no man's land of the Berlin Wall, right? In a country that, like the DMZ of East Germany. Okay? And the Korean Pavilion actually does something that we have been living in, a kind of condition of reapproachment of the two Germanys. Especially if you live in Berlin, it's interesting that you cannot really see anymore where was the wall before. These sites start to cohabitate with one another. And that's something that we are reminded of when we look at the Korean Pavilion. It's a very nice strategy to basically, first of all, be a host and say, never party alone. Bring your friends. And it's a very beautiful and generous gesture to say this should be about all of Korea, and not only South Korea, not only about North Korea, but of all of it.
Yeah, but then it's really interesting that you can't really make the division when you're in the pavilion. So you see that you never know, is this now north or is this south? And it's a little bit like when you now are in Berlin, because you might think, well, the city was divided for such a long time, so you should read it in the city also after the wall has gone, and you should somehow notice, okay, that was the western part, that was the eastern part, but that's actually not the case. So many times you don't know, was that east or was that west? And also a lot of tourists always ask, so where was the wall, and am I on the eastern part? Or this was the west, and we say, no, that was the eastern part. So it's this kind of blurring is interesting, and that's what you do in your pavilion as well.
There's a very clever way in the use of exhibits and captions. Because on the level of exhibits, there's this conscious blurring of these kind of east-west or north-south questions, and I think that's the moment of enchantment where you see something and you're simply hit by the impact of what you're looking at. It's not coded yet. When you look at an image or an exhibit, you don't always know, unless you're very familiar with Korea, is this from north or is this from south? And that's very important, because then you're actually looking at the things, and you're not looking at something in order to affirm your prejudice, for instance. Yeah, this must be North Korea, because it looks like it. Very often, actually, then it happens the contrary. And if you care to read the caption, it will tell you, no, this isn't Pyongyang. This is Seoul. And in this way, the exhibition really manages, I think, very well to strip away, like a piece of superfluous garment, the kind of judgments that we have accumulated over the years, codings, these kind of labels stuff, and they enable us to look at the thing itself again, and then to understand, well, maybe this kind of boundary, this separation between the two countries is really more representative of a political will so far than of the actual cultures that is actually one culture.